They chose the hallway because it looked like an advantage. 4 men, one narrow corridor, no space to run, no space to circle. It was supposed to end the way these things usually end: someone getting pinned, someone getting hurt, someone proving a point loudly. 9 seconds later, the exit was open. No one remembered a big strike, no one remembered a dramatic fall. What they remembered was how quickly the pressure evaporated, like the hallway itself had changed sides. Bruce Lee didn't look angry. He just wasn't where they expected him to be. The setting mattered because it was unremarkable. It wasn't a ring or a stage. It was a building people moved through every day: plain walls, hard floor, the faint smell of dust and old paint. A hallway narrow enough that 2 men could pass only if one turned his shoulders slightly. No room for footwork the way most people imagine footwork. No space to fight pretty. Witnesses described it as a place where sound traveled oddly. A voice at one end carried too well. A shuffle of shoes sounded louder than it should. The corridor forced everyone into single-file thinking, even if they didn't realize it. It was a space designed to funnel movement, not allow it. Bruce was there for an ordinary reason: coming from training, moving between rooms, speaking with someone nearby. The accounts differ on small details, but they agree on the mood beforehand. It wasn't heated. It wasn't a showdown arranged in advance. It was a moment that turned quickly because a few men decided it could. The 4 men weren't described as professionals. They were described as aggressive, overconfident in numbers, comfortable in the social intimidation that comes before physical contact. They had that particular energy of men who don't want a clean fight, but a situation where fear does the work first. Their advantage was supposed to be simple: take up space, deny movement, make the hallway feel like a wall. People often misunderstand hallways. They assume narrow means trapped. But narrow also means predictable. If you know what the corridor forces someone to do, you can plan around it. Witnesses said Bruce seemed aware of that before anyone else. He didn't stiffen. He didn't accelerate into panic. He looked at the space the way a trained person looks at distance, not as a threat, but as information. The 4 men approached in a shape that suggested a plan without strategy: 2 in front, close enough to block; 1 to the side, ready to grab; 1 behind, intending to close the door on retreat. They didn't need skill to do that. They only needed the confidence that comes from believing one person must respond to 4. What changed the atmosphere wasn't yelling. It was the way the hallway suddenly became occupied by intent. People nearby stopped moving. Even those who didn't know Bruce sensed that something was forming, the way you sense it when air in a room stops behaving casually. Bruce did not raise his voice. He did not posture. He did not square up dramatically. Witnesses later said his calm was the first unsettling thing, the calm of someone who sees options where others see only constraint. And in that narrow place, where most men would feel their choices shrinking, Bruce's body language suggested the opposite: that he was already deciding where the opening would be. The men tried to claim authority the way untrained groups often do, by manufacturing inevitability. They spoke as if the outcome was already written, using tone and closeness to create the impression that resistance would be foolish. One stepped in too near, testing how Bruce would react to pressure before any contact. Another shifted behind him, not discreetly, but with the confidence of someone who thinks numbers don't need subtlety. Witnesses later disagreed on the words exchanged, but they agreed on the pattern. The men wanted Bruce to react emotionally. Anger would justify escalation. Fear would justify control. Either would give the group the story they wanted: 4 men forcing one into a predictable shape. Bruce didn't give them either. He looked at them the way a calm instructor looks at an overcommitted student, not with contempt, but with attention. Several witnesses remembered that he didn't focus on the loudest one. He watched the one whose feet were positioned to close distance. He watched hands. He watched weight. 1 man attempted the first real contact, reaching to grab or shove, something meant to make the confrontation physical on their terms. The hallway made it look unavoidable. In a narrow corridor, even a small step forward feels like a trap. Bruce adjusted his position by inches. That's the detail witnesses returned to, an adjustment so small it didn't look like a move until the outcome appeared. It wasn't retreat, it wasn't attack. It was placement, choosing where the body would not be trapped. The group tried to compress. 2 in front tightened their line. The sideman angled in. The one behind moved closer. Their plan relied on one principle: close space and deny escape. Bruce's response relied on a different principle: don't fight the wall, change the line. He didn't try to push through the center as if strength could solve it. He didn't backpedal into the man behind. Instead, he seemed to steal a half step of angle toward the seam between two bodies, where the group's coordination was weakest. People watching didn't understand it in the moment. They only felt the sudden shift in pressure, as if the hallway's trap had loosened. One man reached again, another grabbed, the group finally committed. And this was where Bruce's authority appeared most clearly. He didn't respond as if he were surrounded. He responded as if he were dealing with a sequence, one problem at a time, solved efficiently without adding drama. The men expected a fight. What they were about to experience was something closer to removal, being taken out of position without being given the satisfaction of chaos. The hallway remained narrow. The walls stayed where they were. The only thing changing was who controlled the line. The tension rose because the group's confidence was audible. They began to talk over one another, small instructions, quick laughter, the nervous noise people make when they want a situation to feel under control. The hallway amplified that noise, turning it into a kind of pressure. To anyone watching, it looked like the four men had already won space, already reduced Bruce's options. But then the group did something that often happens when numbers become overconfident. They crowded each other. In a tight corridor, bodies interfere, feet overlap, shoulders block hands. The group's advantage, multiple attackers, can become a disadvantage if they move as four individuals instead of one coordinated unit. Witnesses later said that was the first crack. The men were aggressive but not organized. Bruce remained organized. He didn't widen his stance the way people do when they brace for impact. Widening in a hallway makes you slower. He stayed narrow, aligned with the corridor, as if he were designed for it. He kept his shoulders low. He kept his hands close. He looked calm, but that calm had shape. It wasn't softness. It was readiness without waste. One man grabbed for control, wrist, sleeve, shoulder, something meant to anchor Bruce. Another moved in to add weight. The third tried to block the exit line. The fourth pressed from behind, closing distance. The crowding intensified. For a moment, it looked like Bruce was finally pinned. Then witnesses described the sensation of missing. The men's hands were on him, yet the control they expected did arrive. Bruce wasn't yanking free with strength. He was turning slightly, dropping a shoulder, changing the angle of his hips, movements too small to look dramatic, but large enough to remove leverage. A grab that should have stopped him became an inconvenience. A shove that should have pinned him found space. A step meant to block the corridor became a step that blocked another attacker instead. The hallway worked like a funnel. The group assumed the funnel favored them, but funnels favor whoever can control rhythm. Bruce controlled rhythm by refusing to hurry. Even under pressure, his movement looked paced, as if he had decided the tempo and the men were late to it. Witnesses also remembered how little sound came from Bruce. No yelling, no sharp breathing, no verbal threats. That silence made the men's aggression look louder and less intelligent. It also made the onlookers more attentive, because the decisive moment, whatever it was, would likely be small. Someone later said the hallway felt thin, as if the space between bodies had become the only place where truth existed. Bruce seemed to see that space clearly. The men seemed to ignore it. The pressure peaked. The group committed again, trying to close everything at once. And that was when the 9 seconds began to matter, because the moment the group fully believed they had him was the moment their control began to dissolve. Witnesses struggled to describe what happened because they expected a single highlight moment, a strike, a throw, a slam against the wall. Instead, they saw something that didn't give them a clean before and after. The first thing that changed was alignment. Bruce shifted his body into an angle that forced one attacker to adjust his feet. That adjustment, in a narrow corridor, created a brief obstruction, one man's leg blocking another man's path. The group's line broke, then Bruce moved through the seam, not sprinting, not charging, sliding through the only space where two men were not perfectly coordinated. His shoulders turned slightly to reduce target width. His hips followed. A hand that had been holding him no longer held anything useful. A second hand reached and found cloth, not control. One attacker stumbled, not dramatically, just enough to lose position. In a hallway, losing position is everything. It means you are no longer part of the wall, you are part of the clutter. The attacker tried to recover, but recovering required space the corridor didn't give. Bruce didn't strike hard. If he struck at all, witnesses remembered it as short, interrupting contact, something that stopped pursuit rather than punished it. The kind of touch that changes breathing or posture, not the kind that creates spectacle. The men expected violence, they received interruption. The second attacker overcommitted forward, trying to reblock the line. Bruce didn't fight him. He let the man's momentum carry him into the wrong place, and the man behind him became trapped by his own teammate's body. For a split second, the group's 4 bodies became their own obstacle. Bruce used that second the way trained people use seconds, not to win dramatically, but to change the situation's geometry. He was suddenly closer to the exit than the men expected. The corridor that was supposed to trap him was now working like a channel, guiding him out. Witnesses later said the 9 seconds felt shorter than memory allows. Some timed it roughly after the fact, counting from the first committed grab to the moment the line to the exit was open. Whether it was exactly 9 seconds or slightly more, everyone agreed it was too fast to narrate in real time. The key detail is that the men were still upright, nobody lay unconscious. The hallway wasn't splattered with violence, yet the threat was gone because the group no longer had a coherent position. They had lost the line, and in a hallway, losing the line is losing the fight. Bruce reached the open space of the exit and stopped, not fleeing, not running away. He turned slightly, calm, as if confirming the moment was finished. And the men, now out of position, hesitated, uncertain of what had just happened, and uncertain of how to restart it without admitting they'd lost control. The demonstration wasn't dramatic. That was why it worked. The 4 men experienced a particular kind of failure without a spectacle to blame. If someone gets knocked down, pride can call it bad luck. If someone gets injured, pride can call it unfairness. But when a hallway trap dissolves quietly, when the exit becomes clear without obvious violence, pride has nowhere comfortable to stand. Witnesses said the men didn't immediately chase. They paused, and that pause revealed the collapse. Their bodies were willing, their confidence was not. They had committed to a plan based on numbers, and the plan had failed so quickly that they couldn't adjust fast enough to keep the illusion of control. One of them spoke something sharp, something meant to restore dominance through sound. It didn't work. The hallway, which had amplified their confidence earlier, now amplified their uncertainty. The words sounded smaller. Bruce didn't respond with a threat. He didn't taunt them. He didn't explain. He simply stood where the exit was open, breathing calmly, posture organized. That calm made the men's confusion feel more visible. A student or observer near the edge moved slightly, as if to intervene or check whether the situation would reignite. But the atmosphere had already changed. The men had lost the public momentum they came for. They had expected to be the story. Now they were just 4 men who couldn't explain why the corridor stopped obeying them. This is where Bruce's psychological dominance lived. He didn't win by making them suffer. He won by making their advantage irrelevant. He didn't need to prove strength. He proved clarity. Witnesses described his face as focused rather than emotional, calm but not indifferent. The expression of someone who has finished solving a problem and has no interest in extending it for pride. The men began to withdraw in small ways, feet shifting back, shoulders turning slightly away, hands lowering. They didn't announce retreat. They simply lost the forward pressure that had made them dangerous. One man looked at another, searching for agreement on what to do next. That glance was the final sign of collapse. A group that must consult itself has already surrendered initiative. Bruce waited long enough for them to recognize the new reality, then moved away, not dramatically, not urgently. The exit remained clear because it had become clear by structure, not by threat. Later, witnesses said the most unsettling part wasn't the escape itself. It was the restraint afterward. Bruce didn't act like a man who had survived something heroic. He acted like a man who had prevented something from becoming worse. And in that quiet restraint, the lesson landed without being spoken. In tight spaces, control isn't about force. It's about not giving the space your panic. The story traveled because it was hard to inflate. People who weren't there wanted dramatic details, big strikes, slammed bodies, a clear finishing move. The witnesses didn't provide them. They described the hallway, the 4 men, the 9 seconds, the confusion afterward. And the frustrating truth that they couldn't fully explain the method because it looked like almost nothing. That almost nothing became the legend. Some listeners assumed it must have been luck. Others assumed it must have been exaggeration. but the people who had seen it spoke with an unusual restraint, and restraint is persuasive. They didn't tell it like a fight story. They told it like an incident that forced them to reconsider what skill looks like when it isn't trying to impress. In the months after, students referenced it quietly in training, especially when practicing against grabs or pressure in tight spaces. Not as a fantasy of beating multiple attackers, but as a technical reminder: the line matters, the seam matters, the moment a group crowds itself, an opening exists. What lasted most wasn't the image of four men failing. It was the image of Bruce staying organized under compression. Witnesses said that was the real difference. Most people become emotionally loud when cornered. Bruce became smaller in the right ways, narrower, calmer, less wasteful. Years later, those who told the story often emphasized what Bruce did not do. He didn't punish, he didn't chase, he didn't make it theatrical. That absence gave the incident its long-term weight. It suggested that the goal of skill is not victory in a hallway, but prevention, leaving the space intact and leaving people intact if possible. And that is why the hallway story joined the larger body of Bruce Lee legends. Not because it promised an impossible outcome, but because it described something that felt real, a brief, controlled solution to a dangerous situation. It ended without applause. It ended with movement resuming, people walking again, voices returning, the hallway becoming ordinary. The men disappeared into wherever they came from, carrying a story they couldn't comfortably tell as a triumph. Those who witnessed it carried something else: the memory of a narrow space, a brief burst of pressure, and the strange way control can make an exit appear where none seemed to exist. 9 seconds later, the exit was clear, and for years after, nobody could explain it, only repeat it.